Hello, my name is Bailey, and I'm 32 years old. For the past 3 years, my life's work has been a small plot of land, my family affectionately, and I do mean that, in the most sarcastic way possible, called my hobby farm. They thought it was a joke, a little girl playing in the dirt, after walking away from a perfectly good corporate career. They never could have imagined that one day, that very dirt would become the only thing standing between them and a terrifying desperation. They never dreamed they would have to come to me, begging for a single drop of water from the artesian well they swore was the single biggest waste of money they had ever seen. The tables didn't just turn, the entire world flipped on its axis, and I was the only one left standing on solid ground. Before I tell you exactly how my so-called midlife crisis project became the most important place in the entire county, and the brutal terms I laid down for my own family, I'd love it if you'd let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel, and if you've ever felt underestimated or had your passion dismissed by the very people who were supposed to be your biggest supporters, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And for all the new viewers here, subscribing to this channel means you're joining a community of people who understand that sometimes the greatest vindication comes not from saying, "I told you so," but from simply living the truth you built with your own two hands. My old life was a high-rise office building in the city, a world of sealed windows and the constant, low hum of recycled air. I was a senior marketing associate for a massive tech firm, and by all external measures, I was a success. I had a healthy 401k, a sleek apartment with a view of other sleek apartments, and a wardrobe full of clothes I hated. Every morning, I would encase myself in a shell of professional fabrics and muted colors, a costume for a role I never truly wanted. The person my family saw, the one they were so proud of, felt like a stranger to me. She was efficient, she was ambitious, and she was profoundly, soul-crushingly empty. The dream of a farm wasn't an escape, it was a reclamation. It was a desperate attempt to find the real Bailey, the one who wasn't afraid of dirt under her fingernails, and who found more joy in the unfurling of a new leaf than in the closing of $1 million deal. I wanted to feel the sun on my skin, not just through a pane of glass. I wanted to create something real, something that could sustain me, not just financially, but spiritually. I wanted to go home, even if it was to a home I had to build myself. The day I decided to finally do it, to trade my keyboard for a shovel, I gathered my family for dinner. I chose my parents' house, a sprawling, perfectly manicured home in a wealthy suburb, thinking the familiar setting might soften the blow. It did not. The announcement landed on the pristine cream-colored tablecloth like a lead weight. I explained my decision with a trembling but determined voice, laying out my plans, my savings, the research I had done into sustainable agriculture. I spoke of purpose and passion, of creating a life that aligned with my values. They stared at me as if I had just announced my intention to join a traveling circus. My father, Richard, was the first to speak. He was a man who measured life in spreadsheets and stock portfolios. He took off his glasses, polished them with a napkin, and looked at me with an expression of deep, paternal disappointment that was somehow worse than anger. "Bailey," he began, his voice laced with a strained patience, "you have a 401k with a six-figure balance. You have a clear career path, stock options. You are throwing all of that away. What, exactly? Chickens? A vegetable patch? This is a phase, sweetheart. A very, very expensive phase." He wasn't trying to be cruel. In his mind, he was being practical, trying to save me from myself. He saw my dream, not as a plan, but as a symptom of some temporary insanity. My mother, Eleanor, was next. Her concerns were less financial and more aesthetic. She was a woman who lived for her social calendar, for the pristine image of her family. She twisted the pearls at her neck, a nervous habit I'd known since childhood. "What will we tell the neighbors, Bailey? What will I tell my book club? Our daughter, the farmer." She said the word farmer, as if it tasted like ash in her mouth. "It just sounds so grubby, unrefined, after all the money we spent on your education." The unspoken sentiment hung in the air. You are an embarrassment to us. But the deepest cut came from my older brother, Mark. Mark was the golden child, the one who had followed the approved path and excelled at it. He was a successful real estate developer, all sharp suits and a predatory smile. He had married a woman, Jessica, who was his perfect match in snobbery and ambition. Mark leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. A hobby farm, he said, the condescension dripping from every syllable. That's adorable, Bales. Truly, it's like a little girl playing house, but with more manure. He chuckled, looking around the table for support. Listen, when you get tired of playing make-believe in the mud and you want a real job again, let me know. Maybe I can find an opening for an assistant in my office. We could use someone to answer the phones. Jessica, my sister-in-law, chimed in with her own brand of venom, thinly veiled as a jest. Oh, how wonderfully rustic. I do hope you have excellent Wi-Fi out there in the wilderness. You'll need it for when you have to order takeout. You can't possibly be planning to eat that. She made a vague, dismissive gesture with her perfectly manicured hand, as if the very idea of food grown from the earth was a revolting concept. I sat there, my carefully prepared speech dissolving into dust. Their words were like a swarm of angry bees, each one a sharp, painful sting. They didn't see me. They saw a caricature, a fool. They didn't hear my passion. They heard the ramblings of a lunatic. In that moment, something inside me hardened. The part of me that had so desperately craved their approval shriveled up and died. I realized I wasn't asking for their permission. I was telling them my future. I stood up, my chair scraping against the polished hardwood floor. Thank you for your input, I said, my voice colder than I intended. I'll send you my new address once I'm settled. I walked out of that house, not with my tail between my legs, but with a fire in my belly. Their mockery was the fuel I needed. I would not fail. I would not let them be right. Ignoring the barrage of concerned texts and voicemails that followed, I poured every ounce of my energy and a terrifying amount of my savings into finding the right piece of land. I wasn't just looking for acreage. I was looking for a specific kind of geological promise. I spent weeks with topographical maps and geological surveys, a process my father called an exercise in wishful thinking. I finally found it, 40 acres of rolling hills, an overlooked pasture, land that others had deemed too rugged for conventional farming. But the survey showed something that made my heart leap. Deep beneath the bedrock, hundreds of feet below the surface, was a confined aquifer, an artesian system fed by ancient water, naturally filtered and under pressure. It was a geological lottery ticket. Securing that water was my first and most critical investment. I found a specialized drilling company, a team of grizzled old men who understood deep wells. The cost was astronomical. It took a breathtaking chunk of my savings. When Mark found out how much I'd spent, he called me immediately, his voice a mixture of outrage and amusement. You spent how much on a hole in the ground? He bellowed into the phone. Are you insane? My company could have installed a competition-sized swimming pool, complete with a grotto and waterfall, for that price. At least a pool is useful. You could have parties. What are you going to do with a 600-foot hole, Bailey? Stare into it. I'm going to drink from it, Mark, I had replied calmly, and hung up the phone. The day the drill rig hit the aquifer, and a gusher of pure, cold water shot into the sky, I cried with relief. It felt like I had tapped into the very lifeblood of the earth. This was my foundation. This was my security. With the well established, I began building the rest of my fortress of sustainability. I designed a sophisticated rainwater harvesting system that my brother mockingly dubbed Bailey's Water Factory. Gutters on the small barn and the modest farmhouse I was renovating fed into a network of massive, interconnected underground cisterns. The water passed through a series of natural filters, layers of gravel, sand, and charcoal, before being stored. To my family, it was eccentric overkill. It rains, Bailey, my mother had said during one of her reluctant visits. The sky provides water for free. You don't need all this complicated, industrial-looking plumbing to catch it. She couldn't grasp that I wasn't just preparing for a sunny day. I was preparing for the day the sky stopped giving. The physical labor was relentless. I built raised garden beds with my own hands, my muscles screaming in protest. I shoveled mountains of compost, my back aching in ways I never knew possible. I built a sturdy chicken coop and a pen for a small herd of Nigerian dwarf goats, giving them all names and learning their distinct personalities. My hands, once soft from a life of typing, became calloused and strong. There were days of profound loneliness, where the only sounds were the wind and the bleating of the goats. In those quiet, aching moments, my family's voices would echo in my head. A hobby farm, playing make-believe, grubby, a waste. One evening, exhausted and covered in mud, I called my mother, hoping for a sliver of warmth or encouragement. Instead, she was bubbling with news about Mark. "Oh, Bailey, you'll never guess. Mark just closed the biggest deal of his career. They're buying a new lake house, and Jessica is planning a trip to Tuscany for the fall to celebrate. A whole month. Isn't that wonderful?" After a brief pause, she added, her voice softening into that familiar tone of pity. "It's just, I worry about you, dear. All alone out there with your projects. Are you sure you're happy?" The question wasn't genuine curiosity. It was a reaffirmation of her own belief that I couldn't possibly be. The trip to Tuscany, the lake house, it all felt like a world away. A life I had purposefully left behind, yet her words still managed to plant a seed of doubt. Was I a fool? Had I made a terrible, irreversible mistake? Months later, after a summer of tireless work, I had my first real victory. My gardens exploded with life. The raised beds were overflowing with vibrant, heirloom tomatoes, deep purple eggplants, zucchini, and every kind of leafy green imaginable. I gathered a large basket, a kaleidoscope of color and life, and decided to bring it to the next family dinner. This, I thought, was something tangible. This was proof. They couldn't dismiss this. I was wrong. The dinner was a masterclass in subtle humiliation. My beautiful harvest was treated as a quaint, childish offering. I placed the basket in the center of the table, a proud centerpiece. Jessica peered at a brilliant red tomato as if it were a suspicious object. "Is it organic?" she asked. Her nose wrinkled slightly, the implication being that it was somehow dirty or unsafe compared to the plastic-wrapped perfection from the grocery store. My father, ever the pragmatist, picked up a zucchini and weighed it in his hand. "What do you figure your cost per pound is on these bales?" he asked, a twinkle in his eye. "Because I can get these for $1 a pound at the Megamart. Your business model needs some work." Mark topped it off. "Hey, not bad," he said, popping a cherry tomato into his mouth. "Maybe you can set up a little roadside stand. You know, like kids do for lemonade. It'd be cute." They laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but a dismissive, patronizing one. The laughter of adults indulging a child's fanciful game. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I had brought them the first fruits of my new life, a piece of my soul in a woven basket, and they had weighed it, judged it, and found it wanting. I quietly gathered my vegetables after dinner, packed them back into the basket, and drove home under a sky full of stars. The sting of their dismissal was a sharper pain than any blister or sore muscle. That night, as I unloaded my cute and unprofitable vegetables into my own kitchen, I made a silent vow. I would never again seek their approval. My farm didn't need their validation to exist, and neither did I. The first whispers of the drought began that spring. It was a subtle shift at first, a topic of casual conversation. The local news meteorologist spoke of below-average rainfall with a forced cheerfulness. The spring, usually a time of lush renewal, was strangely muted. The greens were less vibrant, the earth harder. By the time summer arrived, the whispers had become a constant, anxious hum. The sun beat down relentlessly from a perpetually cloudless sky. The heat was a physical presence, baking the landscape into a brittle, tan husk. In my family's suburban enclave, the first casualties were the lawns. The perfect carpets of green began to show patches of brown, then yellow. The city announced Stage 1 watering restrictions. My mother, Eleanor, called me to complain. "Can you believe it, Bailey? We can only water the garden on Tuesdays and Saturdays now, before 10 in the morning. My prize-winning petunias are going to be ruined. It's an absolute travesty." I listened, staring out my own window at the deep green of my mulched garden beds. My drip irrigation system, delivering precise amounts of water directly to the roots in the cool of the pre-dawn hours. "That sounds tough, Mom," I said, the irony thick in my throat. The drought, however, was not interested in petunias. It tightened its grip with a terrifying silent force. The weeks stretched into a month, then two. The local river shrank, exposing muddy banks that hadn't been seen in decades. The city's main reservoir, the lifeblood of the entire region, dropped to 50%, then 40%. The news reports lost their cheerful tone, replaced by grim-faced officials using words like unprecedented and crisis. Stage 2 restrictions were implemented, banning all outdoor water use. The lush green suburb where my family lived began to look like a neglected graveyard of landscaping. The fines for being caught with a sprinkler on were steep, and neighborhood watch groups, once focused on burglaries, now reported on illicit watering. My brother Mark was incensed. His meticulously designed landscape, a testament to his wealth and status, was dying. He called me not to ask how I was, but to vent his fury. "It's a complete joke, Bales. I pay a fortune in property taxes, and the city can't even provide a basic service like water. We're spending a fortune on bottled water just for drinking. Jessica is losing her mind. She says the house feels unclean. They're talking about shutting off the municipal supply for a few hours a day to conserve pressure. It's like living in a third-world country." He never once paused to ask about my situation. He just assumed my hobby farm was dust, just like his lawn. From my perspective, the world was changing, but my small corner of it remained an island of stability. I was not immune to concern. I watched the sky with a farmer's prayerful gaze, but I was not panicked. My entire farm was an ecosystem designed with scarcity in mind. My deep mulch suppressed evaporation. My crop choices were intentionally drought-resistant, heirloom varieties that had survived harsh conditions for generations. My rainwater cisterns, filled to the brim during the last generous spring rains, were still over 3/4 full, and deep beneath my feet, the artesian well was a silent, steady promise. It was completely independent of the surface water crisis, a deep, cool reservoir, untouched by the sun's fury. Every morning, the wind-powered pump would kick on with a gentle whir, drawing up water that was clean, constant, and entirely my own. I would walk through my vibrant, thriving gardens, a stark, green oasis in a parched, brown world, and feel a strange mix of gratitude and survivor's guilt. The situation outside my property line continued to devolve. Stage 3 restrictions were announced. The city's water pressure became a trickle. Then for hours at a time, nothing. The shallow wells that dotted the affluent suburban neighborhoods, the ones drilled just deep enough to water lawns and fill pools, began to fail. They sputtered, coughed up muddy water, and then went silent. The first call of true desperation came from Mark. His well was dry. He had resorted to having water trucked in, a service for which companies were now charging a fortune, preying on the wealthy and the desperate. He was apoplectic. A few days later, the news I had been dreading and, on some dark level, expecting, finally arrived. The municipal supply officially failed. The pumps were shut down to prevent them from being damaged. An official state of emergency was declared. The surreal images on the news, the National Guard distributing meager rations of bottled water from the back of military trucks, the long, tense lines of my fellow citizens, made it all terrifyingly real. Then my phone rang. It was my father. His voice was unrecognizable. The usual booming, confident tone of Richard, the man who had all the answers, was gone. It had been replaced by a thin, fragile sound, the voice of a man utterly defeated. "Bailey," he said, and the single word was heavy with shame. "Our well, it's gone. We ran it this morning, and nothing. Just air, and then a bit of mud." He paused, and I could hear my mother weeping softly in the background. She's not handling this well at all. Mark's place is the same. He ran out of his trucked-in supply yesterday. The lines for the government water are miles long. Bailey, we don't know what to do." I stood in my kitchen, the phone pressed hard against my ear. Outside my window, a goat bleated contentedly. The sun glinted off the leaves of my tomato plants, heavy with fruit. I had water flowing from my tap. I had barrels of it stored. I had a deep, endless supply of it, just waiting to be drawn. And in that moment, a dark, cold satisfaction washed over me. It was a vile, triumphant feeling. "Now you see. Now you understand." The memory of their mockery flashed through my mind. A hobby farm, playing make-believe, a waste of money. Is it organic? I remembered Mark's offer of an assistant's job, Jessica's sneer about takeout, my father's calculation of my cost per tomato. I savored the vindication for a cold, hard second. I could say no. I could say, "Sorry, my projects need all the water." I could say, "Maybe you should try the Megamart, Dad. I hear they have water there." The words were on the tip of my tongue, but the feeling passed as quickly as it came, replaced by a heavy, sinking sense of dread. The sound of my mother's quiet sobs, through the phone, was not triumphant. It was heartbreaking. This was my family. My foolish, arrogant, blind family. They were thirsty. They were scared. And I was their only hope. The weight of that reality settled on my shoulders, heavier than any bag of feed or pile of compost. My hobby farm was about to be put to the ultimate test, and so was I. "Don't go anywhere," I said to my father, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside me. "Stay put. I need to think." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. The game was over. The real world, in all its brutal, unforgiving glory, had arrived at their doorstep, and now they were about to arrive at mine. The next morning, they came. A cloud of dust announced their arrival, long before I saw the vehicle. It was Mark's luxury SUV, a car designed for pristine asphalt, now coated in a thick layer of grime from the dirt roads. It crawled up my long driveway and parked near the barn, the engine cutting out with a sigh that sounded like defeat. The doors opened, and they emerged one by one, looking like shipwreck survivors, washing ashore on a strange island. My father, Richard, who always stood so tall and commanding, seemed to have shrunk. His expensive polo shirt was rumpled, his face etched with lines of worry I had never seen before. My mother, Eleanor, looked pale and frail, her eyes wide and fearful, as she took in the scene. Jessica got out of the car, clutching a designer handbag, like a life raft, her face a mask of disbelief and disgust. And then there was Mark. My proud, arrogant brother looked haggard. His usually perfect hair was a mess, and his eyes, when they met mine, were a turbulent mix of fury, humiliation, and raw, animal fear. They stood there, in an awkward cluster, a tableau of fallen suburban royalty. The silence was deafening, broken only by the gentle whirring of my wind-powered well pump and the distant clucking of my chickens. They were staring at my farm, but really seeing it for the first time. They saw the deep, verdant green of the gardens, the healthy sheen on the goats' coats, the glint of the sun on the full water trough. They were looking at an impossibility, an oasis in the middle of a desert they now inhabited. My father, ever the patriarch, finally broke the silence, his voice cracking. "Bailey, your farm, it's..." He couldn't finish the sentence. He just gestured vaguely, with a trembling hand, his eyes filled with a dawning, horrified understanding. Mark, incapable of fully shedding his arrogance, even in defeat, stepped forward. He tried to take charge, to frame this as a business transaction, but his voice lacked its usual commanding tone. It was the plea of a desperate man masquerading as a negotiation. "Look, Bales," he said, avoiding my eyes. "We're in a bad spot, a really bad spot. We need water, For drinking, for cooking, we can pay you for it. Name your price. Whatever it is, we'll pay it. I let his words hang in the dry air. I looked at each of them. At the faces of the people who had belittled my dream, who had laughed at my passion. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was a cold, hard clarity. This was the moment all the lonely nights and aching muscles had been leading to. I had rehearsed this in my mind 100 times. But now that it was real, the words came easily. The water is not for sale, Mark, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a knife. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Jessica let out a small, horrified gasp. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Mark looked as if I had physically slapped him. What? He stammered. What do you mean it's not for sale? I'm not going to let you die of thirst. I continued, my gaze steady, moving from one to the other. You are my family, whatever that means. But the water isn't free, and I don't want your money. Your money is worthless here. Richard took a step forward, his face ashen. Then what do you want, Bailey? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. What is your price? I took a deep breath. I want your time, I said. I want your hands. This well, I pointed toward the pump. It doesn't just provide drinking water. It provides life for this farm. The soil, the plants, the animals. Everything you see here is part of a system, and the water is its heart. The farm sustains me. If you want water from my well, you will work on my farm. You will learn what it takes to keep this place and yourselves alive. I let that sink in, watching their expressions shift from confusion to outrage. You can't be serious, Jessica shrieked, her voice high and shrill. You want me to get my hands dirty, to touch dirt? Mark's face flushed with anger. This is insane, Bailey. It's blackmail. We are your family. The dam of my composure finally cracked, just a little. A sliver of the old hurt bled into my voice. You didn't seem to think so when you called my life a make-believe game. I shot back, my voice sharp and clear. You didn't act like family when you laughed at me. Well, welcome to my reality. This is not a game. This is survival. These are my terms. You need water to live. This farm needs work to live. You will learn to weed the gardens you thought were a joke. You will learn to muck out the goat pen. You will learn to turn the compost pile and repair the fences and collect the eggs. You will do the work I do every single day, from sunup to sundown. The very work you mocked. An ugly argument erupted among them. Mark was furious, pacing back and forth, kicking at the dry dirt. I'm not doing it, he snarled. This is humiliating. There has to be another way. We'll go to another town. We'll find something. With what, Mark? My father said, his voice heavy with resignation. The roads are clogged. There's no gas. And there's no water anywhere else, either. You heard the radio. This is the only way. They stood there, trapped between their pride and their thirst. The desperation in their eyes was a palpable thing. I saw my father look at my mother, whose face was a portrait of utter despair. She looked so small, so lost. In that moment, the fight went out of him. He turned to me, his shoulders slumped in surrender, his eyes filled with a profound and terrible shame. We'll do it, Richard said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. We accept your terms. Mark stopped pacing. He stared at his father, then at me, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. He was trapped, and he knew it. He gave a single curt, furious nod. His pride was broken. The real work was about to begin. The first day was a tragicomedy of ineptitude. I rose at my usual hour, just before dawn, and found them huddled in the spare rooms I had set up, looking lost and sleep-deprived. I handed them work gloves, which they handled as if they were alien objects. Jessica emerged from her room, wearing a pristine $1,000 athletic wear set, her hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, looking ready for a yoga class, not farm labor. Her first task was to help me weed a large bed of carrots. 10 minutes in, she let out a blood-curdling scream and leaped back, stumbling over her own feet. I rushed over, thinking she'd been bitten by a snake. She was pointing a trembling finger at the ground. "It's a worm," she shrieked, her face pale. "It's slimy." I simply stared at her for a long moment before sighing and explaining that worms were, in fact, good for the soil. Mark, ever the alpha male, was tasked with turning the compost pile. He grabbed a pitchfork and approached the large, steaming heap as if it were a mortal enemy. He tried to muscle his way through it, using his upper body strength, and was exhausted within minutes. His face beat red. "This is ridiculous," he panted, leaning on the pitchfork. "There has to be a more efficient way to do this." I walked over and showed him how to use his legs and core, how to use the tool as a lever, not a bludgeon. He watched my demonstration with a sullen, resentful expression. He tried it my way, his movements clumsy and angry. My father, a man accustomed to the weight of a pen, not a 50-pound bag of feed, struggled to haul grain to the chicken coop. He moved slowly, methodically, his face a mask of grim determination. He didn't complain, but I could see the strain in his every movement, the deep ache of muscles that hadn't been challenged in decades. It was my mother, Eleanor, who surprised me the most. I assigned her the task of harvesting green beans, a quiet, repetitive job. She knelt on a foam pad I gave her and worked with a surprising focus, her movements slow but precise. She didn't speak a word for hours, just the soft snap of beans being picked from the vine. It was as if the simple, mindless task was a refuge from the chaos of the past few days. I was not a cruel taskmaster. I was patient, but firm. I corrected their form, explained the why behind every task, but I offered no effusive praise or pity. "No, Mark, hold the hoe like this. You'll throw your back out the other way. Jessica, the chickens won't bite you. Just scatter the feed evenly. Dad, pace yourself. It's a marathon, not a sprint." At midday, we stopped for lunch. I served them fresh bread I had baked, goat cheese from my own goats, and a large salad made from vegetables they had just, however reluctantly, tended to. They ate in silence, too exhausted to speak. For the first time, I saw them eat not for pleasure or social ritual, but for fuel. The food was a necessity, earned through sweat. At the end of that long, grueling day, I filled their large water containers from a spigot connected directly to the well. The sound of the cool, clear water splashing into the plastic jugs was the most beautiful sound in the world. They had earned it. The days bled into a week, and a new, strange routine settled over the farm. Their soft, city hands became raw, then blistered, then calloused. Their expensive clothes were stained with dirt and sweat. The arrogance that had been their armor began to crack and fall away, eroded by sheer physical exhaustion and a growing, grudging respect for the reality of my life. They started to see the farm not as a collection of random projects, but as a complex, interconnected system. Mark, the real estate developer, found himself unexpectedly fascinated by the engineering of my water systems. One evening, after a long day of clearing a new irrigation ditch, he asked to see the schematics I had drawn for the rainwater harvesting and filtration. He spread the large papers out on the kitchen table, studying them under the lamplight. "This is actually brilliant," he admitted, his voice low. "The way you've used gravity feeds, the multi-stage filtration, it's a closed-loop system. It's incredibly efficient." It was the first compliment he had ever given me that wasn't backhanded. A few days later, I had a quiet moment with my mother. We were sitting on the porch in the evening, shelling a huge bowl of peas for dinner. For a long time, we worked in comfortable silence. Then she spoke, her voice soft and full of a sorrow I hadn't heard before. "I was so worried about you, Bailey," she confessed, not looking at me. "I truly was. I didn't understand any of this. In my mind, you were throwing away a perfect life because you were unhappy. I thought this farm was a symptom of your sadness. I never imagined that you weren't running away from something, but that you were building something better." She finally looked at me, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. It was a simple, profound apology, and it unknotted something in my chest that had been tight for years. The true turning point, the moment I knew something had fundamentally shifted, came during the third week. One of my goats, a sweet-natured doe named Willow, fell ill. She had a fever and was refusing to eat or drink. I spent the entire night in the barn with her, giving her water with a syringe, covering her with blankets, whispering encouragement to her. The next morning, I was utterly exhausted, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep. I stumbled into the kitchen to make coffee and saw my father already awake. He was looking out the window at the barn. "How is she?" he asked, his voice full of genuine concern. "She's weak, but her fever broke," I mumbled, my head pounding. "I need to go milk the other goats." "No," he said, turning to face me. "You go get some sleep. I'll do it." I stared at him. "You don't know how." "You can show me," he said simply. It's time I learned. And so, in the pale light of dawn, I showed my father how to milk a goat. His movements were awkward at first, but he was a patient student. He was not working for water. He was not fulfilling a contractual obligation. He was contributing. He was helping. He was, for the first time in a long, long time, acting like a father. As I walked back to the house, leaving him to his task, I knew that the drought had broken something open in all of us, clearing the way for something new to grow. After 27 days of relentless, punishing sun, the sky finally broke. It started not with a dramatic storm, but with a subtle change in the air, a softening of the light, a scent of petrichor rising from the parched earth. Then, the first drop hit the dusty porch railing. Then another. Within minutes, a slow, steady, life-giving rain was falling, pattering gently on the tin roof of the barn. We all stood on the porch, my family and I, and watched it. We didn't speak. We just watched the water darken the soil, bead on the leaves of the plants, and run in tiny rivulets down the driveway. The overwhelming feeling was relief, pure and simple. But underneath it, for them, I sensed something else, a kind of melancholy, a regret. The crisis that had brought them here, that had stripped them bare and forced them to change, was over. They could go home now. The rain meant the reservoirs would slowly begin to fill, the wells would eventually replenish, and the municipal supply would be restored. Normalcy was on the horizon. But the old normal was gone forever. The dynamics between us had been irrevocably shattered and reformed. The day before they were set to leave, Mark approached me while I was checking the fence line by the pasture. He was quiet for a long time, just watching the goats graze in the drizzle. "I've been an arrogant idiot," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. He kicked at a loose stone. "A complete, world-class fool. All these years, I thought I was the builder in the family. I build houses, boxes for people to live in. But you," he gestured around at the farm, at the intricate living system I had created. "You built a world. It's not a hobby, Bailey. It's a fortress. It's a future." He looked at me then, his eyes clear and direct. "I was thinking, I'd like to invest, not as a handout," he added quickly, "but as a real partner, to help you expand this, to build more of these systems, maybe help other people learn. What you've done here, it's important." I was stunned. It was a genuine, humble offer. The old Mark would have tried to buy it, to take it over. This new version wanted to be a part of it. I thought about it carefully, the lessons of the past few weeks echoing in my mind. I had found my strength, my voice. I would not give it away easily. "We can talk about it, Mark," I said, my tone measured. "But things have to be different now. They need to be different now. Our entire relationship has to be different. This isn't just about business, it's about respect." I was setting a new boundary, and to my surprise, he simply nodded in acceptance. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't going to be a single event. It would be a long, ongoing process, a series of choices. I saw a flicker of genuine change in him, in all of them, but I was also wary. I knew their transformation was born of desperation. The question of how much of it would stick now that the desperation was fading was a question only time could answer. I fast forward a year. Whisperwind Acres is more alive than ever. The rain returned, but the lessons of the drought remained. Today, the farm is not just my home, it's a community hub. On this particular Saturday, I'm hosting a workshop on water conservation and sustainable home gardening. The barn is filled with local families, neighbors who now look at their own yards, not as spaces to be decorated, but as land to be cultivated. And my family is here, not as laborers, but as volunteers. My father, Richard, is in the back, patiently showing a young couple how to construct a simple rain barrel system, using his hands with a confidence that would have been unthinkable a year ago. My mother, Eleanor, whose greatest fear was a bit of dirt, is in the garden with a group of children, her laughter bright and easy as she shows them how to plant seeds. Her prize-winning petunias have been replaced by rows of resilient herbs and vegetables. And over by the workshop table, Mark and Jessica are helping to hand out pamphlets. They are listening intently as I speak, their faces open and engaged. They are not the same people who arrived in a dusty SUV, full of pride and fear. The farm didn't just save them from thirst. In a way, it saved them from themselves. They are still learning, and so am I. The drought was a catastrophe for our region, a time of immense hardship and fear. But for my family, it was also a kind of baptism. It washed away decades of pride, misunderstanding, and arrogance. It forced us all to look at the world, and at each other, with new eyes. I never wanted revenge, not really. Deep down, all I ever truly wanted was to be seen, to be understood for who I am, not for who they thought I should be. In the end, by forcing them to see my world, to live in it and work in it, I think they finally saw me. What I learned through all of this is a lesson I want to share with you. Sometimes the things people mock you for, the passions they dismiss as silly or worthless, are the very things that will one day become your greatest strength. Your value is not, and never will be, determined by their understanding of it. It is inherent. It is yours. You build it, you nurture it, and you protect it, even when no one else sees its worth. Now, I want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments below. Have you ever had a moment where your unique skill or passion, one that others might have overlooked, suddenly became essential? I read as many of your stories as I can, and they give me so much strength. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about finding your power in the most unexpected places. And if you know someone who has ever felt underestimated, share this with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear today. Thank you for joining me on this journey, for listening to my story. I wish you all the strength to cultivate your own patch of ground, whatever and wherever that may be. Remember that family is ultimately defined by love and respect, not just by blood.